So, some background information first. The house is relatively new. It was built roughly 10 years ago, and when we moved in, we did a pretty significant reno and installed brand new hardwood hickory floors. If anyone has ever installed hardwood floors, you know that sometimes you leave these small gaps in between the floorboards. This is done for humid weather, because when it's humid, the floorboards tend to expand and fill out the gaps. If there aren't any gaps, then you run the risk of the boards forming these humps. Now, the point of all of that was to explain that when humidity drops and the boards dry out, they actually tend to crack. This can sound like footsteps, and many people complained about this. However, once you get used to the sound, it becomes fairly easy to tell apart the sound of footsteps and the boards popping. When we replaced the floors in my house, the largest gaps were left in my mum's room. Thus, the loudest noises came from there as well. However, when she walks from her bed to the bathroom or out of the room, the boards crack and you can hear the distinct sound of her footsteps. I live on the first floor in the room that is directly below my mum's, so I can easily hear when she's walking around. I have my own house not so far from my mum's, but sometimes she likes it when I spend the weekend there because her area is famous for robberies. So, fast forward a few months. I get used to the sound of my mum walking and can easily tell when it's her walking as opposed to my sister or just the boards popping. However, one night, I'm in my room on my laptop and I hear her get up and walk towards the living room. It's an open concept house and the doors of the master bedroom lead directly into the living room. I think nothing of it until I check the time. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. So I decide to go upstairs and see why the hell she's walking about at 3 a.m. Oddly enough, there was nobody there. Her doors were closed too. Well, I get a glass of water and go back to bed because both her and I have work in the morning. The morning after, I asked her if she was walking around at night, and she said no. I think it may just be the floors, but shit, I was sure that it sounded like her footsteps. This occurred for over a month, on and off. My mum even complained that she would hear these steps in her room while she was in bed. I could hear them as well, but always thought that it was her. Just in case, we decided to install some home security systems and motion detection. Basically, anything that involves opening a door or window will trigger this ring that can be heard throughout the house. We kept hearing the steps, but the security system, it never went off. Fast forward to yesterday. My mum and my sister decided to go on a trip to Europe for 2 weeks and asked me to watch the house. I think that you might know where this is going. So, I'm in bed and it's roughly 2 o'clock in the morning when I hear the loud ding of the security system. I grab my .22 and quietly head upstairs. At this point, I'm assuming that our house has been watched, and when they saw my mum leave, they assumed it was empty. I quietly go upstairs. It's dark as hell, and I'm trying to be as quiet as a 6'1", 200-pound dude can be. I finally made it upstairs and positioned myself in the living room. I wait for roughly 5 minutes, although I must admit it felt like forever. I make sure that I don't hear anything. There's no steps, no breathing, no shuffling, nothing. I then proceed to turn on the lights in the house one by one. Everything was turned on. I checked every window, every door, made sure all the window blinds were shut, etc. And everything was clean. Nothing was out of place. However, I did find the far right window, one that is hidden behind a thick curtain, slightly open. So, it's 3 a.m. All the lights in my house are on, and I'm standing in my sister's room staring at an open window that I know was supposed to be shut. Shit. But what makes it worse is that the window is the one that faces the street, and anyone can be hiding on the patio or just to the right of the window. The motion detection doesn't reach that far too. I say fuck it and close the window. I was thinking that maybe whoever it was just trying to see if they could get it open. I then turn off all the lights in the house and just go back to bed. I'm tired as shit and just want to get some sleep before work. As I get into bed and enjoy the warm embrace of my blanket, all I hear is the sound of my mum getting out of bed and heading into the living room. I just lay in bed, not knowing what to do. Did I miss a spot? Was someone actually in the house? I'm not too scared, just very uneasy at this point. Fuck it. I grab the 22 and run upstairs as fast as possible. And when I get there, there's nothing. The doors are still closed and there was nobody there. Mind you, the time between the steps and me running upstairs was no longer than 15 seconds. Needless to say, I didn't get much sleep that night. But what makes it worse is that I continued to hear those steps every single night at around 3 o'clock in the morning. A few days before my mum and sister's supposed return, I hear the distinct sound of those same steps leaving my mum's room. But this time, instead of going into the living room and stopping there, they proceed to go downstairs. I'm currently sitting on my PC at 12 AM writing this, and I'm just waiting to hear those fucking steps again. I don't know if there is an actual robbery in the house or if it's something else. I see shadows darting in the corner of my eye every now and then too, but usually I just wave that off as a sign of lack of sleep. Anyways, thanks for listening, guys. I sure hope that it's just those boards. These are some strange experiences from a camping trip in northern Ontario I went on back when I was a little kid with my dad and stepmom. I want to preface this by saying that despite the things I've written about, it was still a good experience. My parents split amicably when I was very young, and I didn't live with my dad. I still got to see him though, and these kinds of trips were a bonding experience and were always pretty fun. I just don't want this story to overshadow that. Okay, so on to the story anyway. My dad and stepmom rented a tiny cabin in northern Ontario one summer through a family friend. I don't know exactly where it was, but I'm certain that it was well north of Midland, the regular cottage country for Toronto folks. The cabin was on a lake, and the owner ferried us there on a tiny motorboat. This wasn't an island, mind you. I think there just weren't any roads to access it. Some strange things happened on this trip, and while there isn't a single cohesive timeline here, I'm not an experienced writer. I'll try my best to document them. I've itemized specific events to make it clearer. So 1. The owner had left a canoe at the cabin, and we took it out on a lot of trips on the lake, usually later in the day. I was obsessed with frogs and fish and wildlife as a kid, and this lake was loaded with marshes, so I loved these outings. I remember one in particular. It was almost sunset and we were heading back through one of the marshes, and I heard a faint humming, similar to a transformer coming from the tree line on the shore. My dad and stepmom noticed it too as it grew louder. It stopped all of a sudden a few moments later, but the strange thing was so did everything else. The sound of birds, frogs croaking, and any other wildlife had completely dropped off, and it stayed silent. Nothing else strange happened on our way back, but it was really creepy as hell. 2. The cabin was on the shoreline, but there wasn't a beach or anything close to one. It was actually a very steep and rocky shore around the entire area, but once you got into the water, there was sand. Mussels and crayfish thrived in here, and my dad got the idea to catch some for cooking. Freshwater mussels taste terrible, by the way. Don't try it. My dad isn't a woodsman by any means, but he is a very crafty and resourceful guy. We canoed to a sandy area close to the shore, and we waded out to catch some mussels. On both sides of the water here, the shore has very steep rocks, like 2 floors up with thick forest at the top. At some point during our escapade, I caught a glimpse of something among the trees on the opposite shore. I couldn't make it out very well, but it was white, almost like the texture of birch, and very lanky. I remember thinking that it definitely wasn't a person, but it wasn't too far from the general shape of one. It was staggering around, lethargically and slowly. If it was an animal, then something was definitely wrong with it. I waded over to my dad and told him to look up there, and by that point, it was gone. Because of this, I am still not 100% sure that this is something I imagined. I was 9 or 10 at the time, but I remember seeing it again on the opposite shore on our way back. 3. This is one I don't actually remember. Instead, my dad told me about it. On one of our canoe outings, my dad and stepmom decided to visit this little peninsula. It was on the other side of the lake, close to the marshes area. We all got there and dragged the canoe onto that little shoreline there was, and we walked inland, single file. There wasn't a path, but the trees weren't particularly dense either. There was enough to see the water when you looked back. Pretty soon, we noticed that the entire place was covered in mushrooms, and live trees had given way to down dead trees further inland. This was unusual because it didn't look like there had been a forest fire or anything. They were just dead. It also started smelling really, really bad. Not wanting to endanger us by going further, we all turned back. He didn't want to let on that he was nervous because I was young at the time, but told me that it seriously freaked him out. We stayed clear of that peninsula for the rest of the trip, in fact. Number 4. This is something that my dad told me happened to him during this trip a couple of years ago. He went hiking by himself at some point, and when he was deeper into the woods, everything around him just stopped. There was no sound whatsoever, no movement, no wind or leaves falling. It all returned a minute later, and nothing else eventful happened for the rest of his hike. This one isn't really that scary, but it kind of adds to the tone of the whole thing. 5. He spent most nights having fires outside, and one night, my dad and I stayed up watching X-Files on this tiny black and white TV. I'm not actually sure how this place even had power, since it wasn't accessible by any roads. Maybe it had a generator, or even a small PV battery setup for all I know. There wasn't much other than a couple of lights, that TV, and a small water pump to the lake, so it's possible. Anyways, I was young and X-Files was spooky as fuck to me. During one of the episodes, we both heard that humming coming from outside, like when we were on the canoe. It was faint, but it was definitely there. We went outside with a flashlight to see if we could identify it, but we couldn't see anything. We didn't want to go into the woods this late or take the canoe out, and it sounded like it was far away enough, so we just went back inside. It was intermittent throughout the rest of the night, sometimes getting louder and sometimes quietening down. In the morning, our water wasn't working. My dad went to investigate, and apparently the pump powering cabling had been messed with. It was an easy fix, but strange nonetheless. 6. This one is probably the most unsettling one that I can remember. I'd wake up earlier than everyone else most mornings, because I was pretty hyped to go out and catch toads and frogs and whatever else I could find. I even set a trap for a chipmunk one time, and successfully caught it. I remember one morning, I had woken up just before sunrise and was still in bed. In the window adjacent to my bed, though, I saw something that usually wasn't there. It was half a fucking face, poking around the edge of the window and staring into our cabin. It was a sickly pale kind of orange colour, with giant black holes where the eyes were supposed to be. This thing was definitely not human. I obviously flipped my shit and hid under the covers until everyone else woke up. When they all woke up and everyone started moving, there was no sign of anything there. I've always thought of this particular experience as something that I just imagined after just waking up. I mean, it had to be, right? About a month ago, though, I met up with my dad while visiting my home city. We got to talking about this trip a bit again. He mentioned that there were quite a few times when he felt uneasy on this trip. For example, my dad usually goes jogging early in the morning for exercise, and it's a habit he still keeps up to this day. He decided to abstain a couple of mornings at the cabin, though, because there was something which he just couldn't place that was creeping him the hell out. I only connected this with the window incident after our conversation, but when I did it, it really made me think about this entire trip, and is the one reason why I decided to share this. I can't undeniably prove any of what happened, but for what it's worth, I don't tell these stories regularly, or at all in fact. G'day mates, it's Busta here. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks again to the Hive members that bravely shared their stories for us all here, and I hope you guys are all doing really well. For the chance to have your story feature in a video, you can send your story to my email, which is in the description below. If you would like more scary stories too, you can click on the card at the top right of your screen or on one of the annotations on your screen right now. As always guys, it would be awesome if you could like, share, comment, and subscribe if you're new. Don't forget to follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for updates throughout the week. And also, if you would like content early and completely advert-free for as little as $1 a month, feel free to click on the link to my Patreon account and sign up there for regular MP3 format stories. Thanks again for tuning in and for all the love as always, guys, and I'll see you mates in the next one.